The Zohar in this week's parasha tells us a story that reminds us how each of us has a unique spiritual path that we're supposed to follow, and how there are some opportunities to transcend our own path, as we'll see with Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. In Zohar von einige Parasha wird erzählt, as einmal, the Zohar this week's parasha tells us once, wenn die Chavrai von Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai seien bei ihm gewesen, that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had his colleagues or his students with him. In Yonim von Seidas Torah, they were discussing the secrets of the Torah. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai noticed that Rabbi Yossi was thinking about contemplating issues of this world. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says to Rabbi Yossi, Yossi, come, Yossi, get up. Ashlim diyuknoch, let me help you complete your profile. The os chad choser bach, because you're missing a letter of your name. In other words, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai discerned that the fact that Rabbi Yossi was caught up thinking about things of this world is givarna chasaron inside yukon. It somehow undermined or weakened his spiritual profile. And ein ois von seinem Namen choser bach, one letter of his name, the commentaries point out the letter Yud of the name Rabbi Yossi was missing. So then, as a result of that, Rabbi Yossi got up, and he got passionately and joyously involved in learning Torah. Stuck up at Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon looked at him, and Amalei said to him, Rabbi Yossi, Hashta an Shalom. Now you are whole, you're complete. V'diyuknach Shalom, and your profile, your image is also complete. And then Rabbi Shimon had gesagt nach Torah from pasuk of Vayakhel tzitz gomer. Then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went into a Torah analyzing the spiritual meaning behind the tzitz. It's a strange story. In Plugas der Sipper Talmud B'Yoser, in context, the story doesn't seem to make any sense, because we can zayin. How is it possible? As Rabbi Yossi, we're not talking about you and I, people with ADHD. We're talking about Rabbi Yossi. Was given von der Gedule HaTanoim, is one of the greatest of all of the Tanoim. And where is he at this time? He is with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and all these great, very powerful tzaddikim. And they're talking about the secrets of Torah. So that Rabbi Yossi at that time is going to be distracted by issues of this world, which to you and I sounds like, did I pay my bills, or what's the weather going to be? And even if we can somehow justify that Rabbi Yossi's focus at that point on issues of this world is given in an oifen, was is ausgehalten al pi Torah. It wasn't like us thinking about the weather or what's on our shopping list, but rather was aligned with the values of Torah. In fact, it's so justified according to Torah that it was actually appropriate to pause from listening to the teachings of the secrets of Torah and actually think about these issues. If that's the case, then the question goes the other way. Why would that then result in Rabbi Yossi missing a letter out of his name, which sounds like it's a negative thing? So either it's strange behavior from such a great person in such a great context, or it's appropriate behavior, in which case it's strange that he had any negative impact. So will explain it. I'll say den Bir von Taten in seiner Oros of Zohar, based on something that the Rebbe's father points out in his commentary on the Zohar. We'll get into the details of that Kidil Kamon Siv Gimel in just a moment. Before we get there, let's just understand who Rabbi Yossi is and how he's a little different to some of the other Chevrai Kadisha of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Yes, Rabbi Yossi was a member of this unique group of people who were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his colleagues and students. These are people who were totally engaged, fully 24/7, 365 in learning Torah without interruption. Rabbi Yossi was not consistently only engaged in Torah learning to the exclusion of everything else. And he wasn't exactly like his colleagues who never stopped learning Torah to take care of issues of this world. Rabbi Yossi had a different perspective or different role. In fact, like the Gemara tells us, that he was a tanner who used to work with skins. In other words, he wasn't completely devoid of involvement in this world. And more importantly, we discover that Rabbi Yossi was very dedicated to dealing with communal matters. Like, for example, the Gemara Sanhedrin tells us about various enactments or decrees that he brought into play in Tzipori to protect people, actually, to protect women in vulnerable situations, etc. So he was there looking out for communal issues. In other words, we could then say, as the mille de alma, that the so-called worldly matters, which Rabbi Yossi is now thinking about, what's on for lunch tomorrow, or what's the weather going to be like. He was thinking about issues that there were issues for the community. On der Fahrer hat zu dem Mafsig gewesen inmitten Shmias aus der Torah, weil mit solchen Zivus durch Talmud Torah, and that would explain why he paused in the middle of very deep, profound Torah learning to think about these things, because communal matters actually override personal Torah study. Und damit wollte man kennen mehr Worte an, that would also explain was es ist von deswegen nächster geworden durch der ist von seinem Namen, and that would explain how he's doing something which is appropriate, and at the same time losing something in his own spiritual makeup, a letter from his name. Because the fact that communal matters override personal Torah study is because of the importance and to the benefit of the community. The community will benefit from me suspending my Torah learning to do something for them. But me, the person who, or in this case Rabbi Yossi, who is getting involved in those communal activities, it's possible that it could have a negative impact on him. As the expression goes, that when you give people communal responsibilities, it could even, so to speak, weaken them, or, remove negative. Negative doesn't talk about a yerida, but it can exhaust a person. So, yes, it's valuable to the community that the person pauses from their learning in order to do what the community needs, but they're going to pay a price for it. And the best example of that is Mordechai, that we find with Mordechai, something the Rebbe discussed elsewhere. As after the Purim miracle, he remains a senior member of Achashverosh's cabinet. So it's described as he gave up Torah learning, which was his primary occupation, and instead took on communal responsibilities, and that was his Geven Tevis Klal Yisrael for the benefit of the Jewish people in the long run. Talmud Torah, which, as we've just mentioned, if you take on communal responsibility, it does override Torah learning. Yet the Gemara tells us that he went down a notch in terms of his importance with regards to the other sages. Yorad chachamim. You see the psukim where he's listed vis-a-vis the other tzaddikim or chachamim. He actually gets demoted by a level because now he's involved in communal affairs. Because yes, he's helping the community, but he's losing the value that you get from being completely invested in Torah. So Rabbi Yossi is doing the right thing by prioritizing the community over his personal learning, and at the same time is feeling some kind of a demotion because of it, because that's what happens. Now, with that introduction, let's look at the Rebbe's father's interpretation of the story, which gives us much greater insight. The Hezber is genommen from Bir von Taten, so that explanation is linked to or derived from the Rebbe's father's explanation in Zayna Ha'aretz of Zohar and his commentary on the Zohar of Dem Sipur, specifically when he comments on this story. As dos was Rabbi Yossi that when Rabbi Yossi contemplated issues of this world, there's no way, God forbid, that he was thinking about meaningless thoughts. Now, das ist the Indian von Amal Sicha, was is Adavar Gadol. Rather, he was engaged with what we call Amal Sicha, which is a very big deal. What is Amal Sicha? There's a Sicha of the Rebbe in Parshas Lech Lecha, Chelek Tezvav, in Bir Maim Chazal, commenting on what our Chazal tell us, that Adam le'omal yivolet, that the reason people were born was in order to work hard. So then the Gemara asks on that pasuk, I don't know, what does work hard mean? Does it mean you've got to work hard? Does it mean you have to work on your speech? Does it have to mean you have to work on Torah? And they conclude, they conclude that the ultimate state of a human being for which we were created is to toil in Torah learning. Says the Rebbe, as von dem Gufa, was in Torah Semes ist, da haben wir, as I mentioned, beschaffen geworden Amal Sicha. The fact that Torah, which is absolute truth, even in its suggested ideas, suggests the possibility that maybe we were created in order to do the toil of speech, is moving us. Dosis and avoid analysis implies that the work of speech is a very elevated kind of work. And then the Sikha, the Rebbe speaks about how it relates to davening. And therefore, even when you arrive at the conclusion that the ultimate purpose for which humans were created is to toil in Torah, that doesn't mean that there's no value or we completely exclude the value of the work that one does with Sicha. No, Zamal Sicha Alein is not the Tachlis B'Yas Adam. It's just not the highest point that a person could reach. So the Rebbe's father says this so-called Mili da Alma that Rabbi Yossi is thinking about is what we call elsewhere Amal Sicha. In fact, you can't disregard the value of Amal Sicha. You need it in order to reach the greatness of Torah. To attain the greatness of toiling in Torah, a person first has to go through the process of toiling in speech, ordinary speech, even if we don't call it davening, speaking in a way that is aligned with what the Eibishter wants, especially when we consider that if we're speaking in the way that the Torah expects of us, that stimulates the speaking that the Eibishter does, as the Eibishter soll sagen, Vayakhel the Asara Mamorish by Nivra Ha'olam. That stimulates the Eibishter, so to speak, speaking out the 10 utterances that make all of existence. With Alter Rebbe is mevor in Tanya. As Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, and we know this, as the Asara Mamor is ständig meluvash in Olam, lesaboiso, lachyoiso, lekaimoy. That consistently at every single moment, the words, the letters of the words of the Eibishter's creative statements live inside the world, stimulate the world, make the world exist, give life to the world. That's Mili de Alma, words of the world, literal translation, in this case meaning much more than the literal, the words that empower our world. The 10 utterances that create the world and are invested in the world, and they are called so-called mundane or ordinary words, because for the Eibishter creating the world is, of course, a very, very limited expression of godliness. Okay, let's try and translate that to something we could relate to and how we develop and grow spiritually. In Avodah Oisius Hastes, in the words of Avodah, how we serve Hashem, it means as follows. What Rabbi Yossi is experiencing, thinking about, contemplating the issues of this world, which we are now linking to the expression Amal Sicha, is the Avodah from Birurim. It's thinking about how to renovate, how to elevate, how to refine our world. Thinking about making the world holy. So that means the person is focused on how do I direct all of my activities towards a goal that services Hashem. Or beyond that, how is everything that I do a knowledge and acknowledgement of Hashem? How do I translate the things of this world into holy things? And when we do that, when we refine the world, when we transform the world to become holy, we sustain the world. Because that stimulates the Eibishter reinvesting into our world through, so to speak, his words. So it's a very important thing, this Mili da Alma in Rabbi Yossi's case. It's literally empowering the world to exist and to be refined and transformed into holiness. Beautiful and powerful as it is, aber von deswegen ist das nicht beerdigt zu dem Inyan von Amal Torah. It does not match up to the greatness of when a person toils in learning Torah, or befrat soidus v'razeh Torah, especially those spiritual deep secrets of Torah, which is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was doing. But if apias durch Amal Sicha, because yes, it is true that when we work to refine the world, which we're now identifying as this Mili de Alma, it is actually very powerful. It allows the universe to exist. It invests godliness into the universe. Und noch mehr, especially when you consider the kavanah, when you read this neshama lemata, as Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, the reason for which our neshamas entered this world is not letaken atzma, not because the neshama needed any improvements, no letaken aguf and nefesh habamis v'chelke ba'olam, but rather to refine and modify and improve the human body, the animal soul, and the world in which we live. Und durch der avodah sabirum 40 bika ist der tachlis von Bria Soila. It's only when we work with the refining of the world that we achieve the purpose for which the world was created, which, as the Medrash famously tells us, that the Eibishter wanted and had this deep desire to be at home in the lowest of all worlds. And how does that happen? Through our avodah, through our amal sicha, through our Mili de Alma, translating the world into a place of holiness. And yet, von deswegen is amal Torah hecher von amal sicha. When a person is invested and toiling in Torah learning, that is far beyond the investing in transforming our world. Because when I refine the world, I draw into this world godliness that is suited to the world. When I'm engaged in Torah learning, I draw into this world godliness that is beyond the world. Und erfahre ist geworden nach Chassonen Rabbi Yosef's Namen, wenn Hirbe Mille de Alma. And therefore Rabbi Yosef's name takes a knock, his spirituality, in a sense, takes a knock when he is involved in channeling godliness into the world. Because prior to that, he was engaged in toiling in Torah, which accesses a far higher dimension of Elikus, and now he's downgraded to accessing the level of Elikus, which relates to existence, so something has dropped, demoted in his name. The only thing is that the story still doesn't seem to make sense. Aber bei Oimek Yosef, when you analyze it more deeply, is das nikim bir maspik if dem was ois chad chosar buch. Something doesn't make sense. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is telling Rabbi Yossi that there's now a letter missing from you, from your avodah, from your name. The Anhalga von Tanoim v'Amiroim is given behesem to Shorish Nishmasa. The way in which the Tanoim and Amiroim conducted themselves always aligned with the source, the root of their neshamas. Aderech v'yunun zefal. As Joseph Rabbi Yossi dafkat mar given b'mila dalme. Why is it that Rabbi Yossi, out of all the people sitting in that very spiritual environment, he's the one thinking about this world? Is Valvi the Tatism of Rabbi Yossi is Bechinas HaMalchus. So the Rebbe Leibik explains that's because Rabbi Yossi manifests Malchus, which is the part of godliness that relates to and cares for and invigorates the universe. Was is the Mokra Feidemus Biyah? Malchus is the source from which the higher spiritual worlds, which are created realities, Bria and Yetzirah, and the lower spiritual and physical reality, which is called Asiyah, they all are channeled energy through Malchus, being Malchus of Atzilus. What makes that universe, that multiverse exist? The 10 utterances, which are words, which come from Malchus. Malchus is the capacity for speech. Und erfahre ist eine Avoid in der Minion von Amal Sicher v'Kiyum Ha'olam. Because Rabbi Yossi is plugged into Malchus Datzilus, what it is his primary means of service of the Eibishter in this world? Empowering the world, transforming the world. Amal Sicha, Mile Da'alma. That's what he's meant to be doing. If that is his core avodah, that's why his neshama is in this world, is in order to refine and transform the world. Yes, objectively, toiling in Torah is far superior to transforming the world. Val Torah is hecher funvelt, and the reason for that is because Torah is fundamentally beyond the scope of this world. But we came and talk about how can we say, as Rabbi Yossi, who's doing his shlichus, considering how to refine the world. So in sein Nomen, his name, which is supposed to represent the person's name is aligned with what their neshama is all about. His name should be missing a letter. That doesn't make sense. Here Rabbi Yossi is acting in accordance with the shlichus of his soul, of a mele to sein shem, which is represented by his name. How's his name missing a letter from him doing what he's meant to? The very famous word of Reb Zusha, as mevet beim nit monen favosser is nit in the dago von tzadikim gedolim. He had no fear that one day, when after 120 years, they're going to say, "Why were you not like the other great tzadikim?" No, favos is a nit Zusha, but they'll ask him, "Why were you not Zusha?" So Rabbi Yossi shouldn't have to concern himself with whether or not this suits Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's avodah, which is that you never stop Amal Torah. This is his avodah. So why is he missing a letter from his name? Beyond that, so now we're saying what? If he's not at the level where he's experienced somebody else's avodah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's avodah, he's going to lose a letter to his name. If he knows that, it will upset him. Und die Idee wird ihm stellen, zum Keim sein, der Avodah, was ist ihm zugeteilt geworden, besimcha v'tuv leibav. How can we expect Rabbi Yossi to fulfill his shlichus with the appropriate simcha and dedication and passion if he knows that he's losing a letter out of his name because he's not doing somebody else's Avodah? And also, we also have to understand, Rabbi Yossi is such an incredible tzaddik. How come he doesn't detect that something's lacking in his world because he's not engaged right then in Amal Torah? And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has to point it out to him. And how come it is that when he reconnects this missing part of his name, by his investment with passion and enthusiasm in Torah learning, and he becomes whole again. How come he doesn't know that himself? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has to tell him, now you're okay. So the answer is, when we understand Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's avodah versus Rabbi Yossi's avodah, we understand the story. Rabbi Yossi mitzad atzmo. If you're looking at Rabbi Yossi through Rabbi Yossi's reality, das heißt Leut wie sein avodah das sein mitzad sein sheresh haneshama. In other words, if you're analyzing Rabbi Yossi's responsibility to serve the Eibishter in keeping with his neshama, what it's all about. He's doing nothing wrong. He doesn't feel that he's doing anything wrong because there is nothing wrong with his focus at that point on refining the world, because that's his avodah. At that moment, Rabbi Yossi is A-okay. He's doing exactly what the Eibishter wants. He is aligned. His name is complete. So what's missing in Rabbi Yossi? What's missing in Rabbi Yossi at that moment is not his personal avodah, it's Rabbi Yossi as a member of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's society. Rashbi als Terosim Nosikid Kamon, was hat euch demol gedacht bei ihm sein? He is with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's avodah is complete dedication to Torah without distraction. If you're in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's circle, you're supposed to be at that level at that time. And the only person who could notice that it's lacking is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because he is the source, the head of what this particular avodah in this particular circle is all about. And he's the only one who can identify when it's been repaired. Okay, let's understand that better. Wenn wir das verstehen, like dem, was der Rebbe bringt herab in Hilchos Talmud Torah, we can understand this better based on a principle that the Rebbe teaches in the laws of how you're supposed to learn Torah. He says, "As kol nefesh tzicha litikuna," every neshama, in order to complete itself, has to lasig v'pardes k'fi ma sheyichol lasig, has to engage in all the 4 dimensions of Torah to the best of its capabilities. V'yefshel lo listaken lishtalem bilti yediyah zoi, and no neshama can complete its purpose, its being, until it's done and experienced this. If a person is a little bit lazy and doesn't really get to comprehend the Torah fully, then the neshama is going to have to return. And that neshama will return multiple times until eventually the person gets to understand and comprehend everything that is within Torah that they should have learned. So there the Alter Rebbe is talking about a person who's lazy and doesn't learn as much as they should. What if a person is not learning as much as they should and it's not because of laziness? Not val al pi Torah is a potter from Talmud Torah. What happens if you have a person who's not learning that amount of Torah because the Torah excuses them from doing so? Zogt Alter Rebbe in Torah Eras in dem Fall can sein zwei fanim. So not in Shulchan Aruch, but in Torah Eras, the Alter Rebbe says the 2 possibilities of what's going to happen next. One is Aleph dos gufei zaira, the fact that the person's lifestyle or intellectual abilities don't allow them to learn Torah to the greatest extent. That is an indication as ein neshama is nit shayach zu mer, that their neshama can't go beyond that. Of a meidat av nit mer asagas Torah, and therefore they don't have to worry about it. Und erfar kommt sie zu ihr Schleimes, ich mit dem Limud Muad, and that person reaches their personal perfection in terms of learning Torah with the volume of Torah that they are capable of learning. Bis afilu from Perek Echad Shachris or Perek Echad Arvis, it might even be he's learning one little bit in the morning, one little bit in the evening. That's good enough for his neshama. One possibility. Then there's another possibility. Base. Because the person is working to the best of their abilities to learn Torah, is Yashlim LaHakadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter will fill in the gaps. Das was kommt und hat es nicht bekommen durch Limud v'asagas Torah. Whatever the person should have but didn't achieve through their Torah learning, the Eibishter will fill it in. We could possibly suggest, when the Rebbe says possibly, it's the Rebbe's innovation. As v'chlolo seine die 2 fanim tolu in the sibbe favos eses yefshelo lasig b'Torah. The 2 possibilities of whether it's going to be considered, okay, that's as good as you could be, versus we're going to fill in your gaps, will be based on why the person is not learning more Torah. If the reason a person is not learning Torah is because the Torah permits a person to earn a salary and do other things that don't allow them to learn Torah full time. Is das Aira as eine Neshama gehet nicht zum Torah? Well, if that's the way that David set up this person's life, that's an indication that they are not intended to become the great masters of Torah, not some Maruv Din Tovin. They're supposed to be the people who master good deeds and don't have to learn that quantum of Torah. This is a neshama that is not so designed or wired to be able to really understand Torah at that level. So to satisfy this neshama, a little bit of Torah in the morning, a little bit of Torah in the afternoon is good enough. Oi, Bober is given von andere. But if the reason a person's not learning so much Torah is because they are engaged with assisting other people, of course, in a manner that is permitted by Torah, tzedakah v'chayotze, because they're giving tzedakah, they're involved in communal activities, as we've already mentioned, if the person is involved in communal activities, that is something that overrides Torah learning. Then what is das an Eifen, as the Eibishter is mashlim das was felt. Then, because the person is dedicated to helping the community or helping others, the Eibishter will fill in the gaps that they didn't manage to learn because they were so busy. Is the Eibishter was mashlim, but das was felt is bakumen in bakumen to chlimudo asagas hatera. Whatever the person couldn't reach of their own accord, the Eibishter will fill it in. One of the possible ways that this could happen is as that benchnim mit hatzlachem erubin im Torah und in azman as in azman muat tutaruf in Torah das sadech harogil daf geder and ari beisman. So one possible way that this could happen is that the person finds they're able to learn Torah in a far quicker period than what should really be expected. Like the Yerushalmi tells us about Chassidim HaRishonim, was HaRishonim is found 10 shoyos bayom. The entire davening process took 9 hours of the day. So I'm asking, what about Torah? So the Gemara says, because they were Hasidim, their Torah learning had a unique bracha. They were able to chap ideas very quickly without having the delay of trying to work out and understand what's going on, and therefore they were able to cover much, much more volume of Torah in a much smaller period of time. Whereas the Alter Rebbe tells us about tzedakah, that when a person is engaged with helping others, their own mind becomes 1,000 times clearer, so they can literally, as the Rebbe points out elsewhere, learn something in 1,000th of the time that it takes for somebody else. Okay, so the two possibilities. Of course, the second possibility is one that's relevant to Rabbi Yossi. Let's plug it back into the story. Let's explain the story. Das was Rabbi Otesenas by Rabbi Yossi felt an ois von sein Namen. Rabbi Shimon Vayakhel looks at Rabbi Yossi, says, if something's missing, the letter Yud is not connected to his name in the way that it should be. Aber frat, vedetat is mevoraz as the Yud von Yossi was connected to Yud von Shem Havaya. So the Rebbe's father points out which letter is the one that was missing, Dafka the Yud, which links back to the Yud of the name Yudke Vavke. Was is Merin Atzilus, which is the primary letter representing the godliness that manifests in Atzilus, remembering that Rabbi Yossi is Malchus of Atzilus. When in Avodas Adam is das Sinim von Amal Torah, and in our human development, this relates to the toiling in Torah learning of Afrat Seidas Torah, particularly in the Kabbalistic secrets of Torah. Was is Hecha von Amal Sicha, the Asar Mamoris Makar Elam Isbiyah, which, as we have already mentioned, the engagement in Torah learning is way beyond the engagement in refining the world. So therefore, it links Amal Torah links to the letter Yud, which is about Atzilus, whereas the engagement in the world, that relates to the other letters of the Eibishter's names, which speaks about the manifestation of godliness in the universe. So where is the Yud? What is the Yud? Das was das in Yonu von Rashbi. That is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Torah Sayom Nase, being completely invested in Torah, or Morei Razeh Torah, somebody who's a master of the secrets of Torah. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is looking from the lens of Atzilus itself, of Morei Torah, sees this missing letter Yud, this lack of absolute dedication to Torah in Rabbi Yossi. Is given that means Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is detecting that in this moment what is required is, as Rabbi Yossi Solariba gained from Sanavoda B'Mila de Alma, that Rabbi Yossi has to change channels from being somebody who is engaged with the refinement and elevation of the world, and right now has to focus and invest completely in the toil of Torah. In an Eifem von Chevrayit, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is noticing that right now Rabbi Yossi has to be like a fully fledged, a colleague of the Chevrai Kadisha of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. There's nothing else but Torah. And therefore he says to him, you've got to make a choice. You've got to make a change. Maybe we could say more than that. Rabbi Shimon must have detected that was a time of special energy to be able to learn Torah. This is one of those opportunities where you learn in a very finite piece of time, and the volume of knowledge or wisdom is exponential. And therefore, so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai he's not rebuking Rabbi Yossi, he's seeing an opportunity. This is where Rabbi Yossi has the chance to now fill in all the gaps of the Torah that he wasn't able to learn because of his involvement in communal affairs. And that Seitvah says, give him a harbe mila de alma. So when he was engaged with the refining of the world, he missed out on all this Torah. Here is the opportunity to catch up. And that's actually what happened. So Rabbi Yossi focused, and he got completely invested in Torah learning. He filled in the gaps. He was whole, his name or his profile or his image was whole. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had assisted him to be able to catch up on his so-called gaps from the past, where he had been so involved in Torah learning, in communal activity, and now he was able to catch up the Torah learning missed through that communal dedication.